Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Entwine Exclusive. My name is Ariel. I'm the Senior Engagement Manager at Entwine, and I'm now coming to you from my parents' basement in New Jersey instead of my apartment in New York City. For those of you who are new to Entwine or to JDC and don't know us just yet, Entwine is the young adult platform of JDC, the Joint Distribution Committee, which is the world's leading Jewish humanitarian organization operating in over 70 countries worldwide. Thank you to everyone here who joined us last week for the Entwine Exclusive with Asher Ostrin. Asher is the interim CEO of JDC, and he shared how the organization has adapted to the coronavirus crisis and how the organization is making decisions about programming and funding during this challenging time. This week, we're going to shift a bit and dive into a really incredible story and an amazing part of JDC's history. So a few housekeeping tips about Zoom. Miriam is here monitoring the Q&A and the chat functions on Zoom. We also have somebody monitoring the comments on Facebook, and we'll have some time at the end of the session for your questions. So feel free to post in the chat box and in the Q&A throughout this entire exclusive. So this week, our featured speaker will be interviewed by Margarita Korol. Margarita is originally from Ukraine, and her family was helped by JDC. And she has a really incredible personal connection to the story you're going to hear from Amir today. Margarita is currently Entwine's RSJ community manager. She creates projects and builds connections with fellow Russian-speaking Jews who are based here in the US. So we're really excited to have you here, Margarita. And I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us a bit about your story and then to introduce us to Amir.
Thank you, Ariel. This is such an honor to interview Amir and act as fangirl to someone I consider a personal hero in my family's trajectories. I was born the week of Chernobyl in Ukraine, and a year later my mother's family immigrated to the US as refugees after 8 years in wait as refuseniks. And that's a term that means that we were originally denied the option of leaving Ukraine. And when we finally had a chance to get out, Amir was waiting for us in Vienna, where the Joint helped us gain political refugee status and successfully immigrate to Chicago. And I don't take for granted that my family was able to start a new life at a time when no one could imagine that the Soviet Union was going anywhere soon, if ever. So Amir, my family, says hello after 32 years. And meanwhile, back in the USSR, my dad's family stayed, and they were able to experience another kind of JDC intervention. This time, it wasn't focused on evacuating Jews, but on bringing Jewish life back to the region. So with that, allow me to introduce Amir, JDC's Assistant Executive Vice President for Special Operations. And as long as this title may sound, I assure you it does not even do justice to the impact Amir's work at the Joint has done globally. During his 30 years of service at JDC, Amir executed some of the most complex rescue operations, bringing Jews from Ethiopia, Yemen, and Syria to Israel, among other operations. Amir, thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here as well. I mean, that's we work to have people like you coming in and being part of us.
It's some nice closure there, yeah. And by the way, this last year, JDC brought me back to Ukraine with a group of 20 other RSJs to experience revitalized Jewish life there. So for those who are just joining your fan base, Amir, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Where in the world are you sitting right now?
So can you hear me?
Yeah. Did you hear my last question?
I can hear you as well. And could you repeat the question? I apologize. I put the earphones on because that are noise canceling, and they make it much easier to converse.
Yes, I saw as it was happening. I anticipated that. So where in the world are you sitting right now?
Well, I'm sitting in what is technically New York City, but it's the suburb of the Bronx, and to be more exact, it's Riverdale. This is north of Manhattan. leading towards Westchester. I'm looking at the Hudson River and the mountains of New Jersey across. It's kind of a nice neighborhood surrounded by parks, but very eerie as any other metropolitan in America today.
Yeah, and who are you isolating with? Are you there with your wife?
I'm here with my wife. She's a clinical psychologist who has patients and moved obviously all her patients to Zoom calls and telephone calls. So she fortunately is able to continue her practice, much in demand practice from home. And I was fortunate to have board meetings and other JDC related important meetings over the last 2 weeks. And it's possible to do it. Earphones, telephones, emails. Yeah, I'm looking at you. I enjoy the crowd and the audience that's here, and it's good.
Yeah, it's like magic. And are you still boxing?
Boxing?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Amir is an avid boxer. Is that still the case?
Nope, not at all.
Okay. Oh yeah, you probably can't pull that off.
No.
From home? Okay.
Usually.
So life has changed that way.
I don't know who told you, but I basically work with a trainer. Of course, it's not relevant now because the gym is closed, etc. And part of it, he did boxing, but yeah. I still do not represent a real danger to anybody who wants to attack me.
That's very funny. So what is the reality like on the ground from your vantage point in New York City? A lot of our audience is curious given that we've become an epicenter.
So the reality is that a lot of the doomsday prophecies that people used to say over the years have not really materialized, but you can see why the downside of living in a huge, crowded quarters like in New York City with buildings and no place and no space inside the apartments and counting on the fact that people are out, that really added strain and added a lot of pain to people. It's not just the number of lost jobs, and it's not only the number of dead, it's all true, but to contain it within crowded quarters like a big metropolis makes it way probably more difficult than if you live in a countryside and you can isolate yourself just by being home and the next neighbor is half a yard, 500 yards away. It's very different.
Yes, I have a similar reality here in Harlem, just over the river from you.
Yeah, no, I live in an apartment building, so it's crowded, but again, I don't use the elevator. I have a terrace so I can get out, I can take a walk. It's a little easier outside of
the little things that are keeping us sane right now. Yeah. Let's pivot to Operation Passover. Can you set the stage for us? What was happening in 1990 in the Soviet Union?
So 1990, it sounds like centuries ago, the Soviet Union was still the evil empire, the Soviet Union headed by Gorbachev, ruled in a tight rule by the secret police, the KGB, and all the Communist Party apparatus. But since the late 80s, there was a beginning of opening. They called it glasnost and perestroika, which is like unfreezing or thawing and opening a little bit towards the west. So we at the Joint tried to test the water. We have a glorious past in the Soviet Union during the 1920s and the 1930s, all the way till World War II. But after World War II, it was not glorious. We were driven out of Russia and then kept away from the Jews. So it was a police state in many, many ways. It was a state that was run centralistically, and from Jewish point of view, it was still forbidden to do anything Jewish. It was considered anti-communist and anti-government activities.
And just some background, it seems like when you were doing Operation Passover, there were synagogues that were there. So there were synagogues, but it was illegal to practice Judaism?
Not really. When I say were synagogues, I can count them probably on one or two hands. I mean, there was one major synagogue in Moscow called the Korol synagogue. That was the one that the government allowed to stay open and kept an eye on what's happening. There was one Rabbi Adolf Shayevitz, who continued to function, but very limited rights. And of course, the clientele didn't come up. Not too many Jews would dare showing in synagogues for minyan. There was a big synagogue in Kiev as well. There were one or two in other big cities. In St. Petersburg, there was a Korol synagogue of some sort. In the major Russian cities that used to have flourished Jewish population, there were physically buildings of synagogue, but in most of the towns, the small towns and others, synagogues were closed down over the years and did not exist.
And I imagine the KGB were closely monitoring the ones that were there.
Absolutely. Even when we visited the Soviet Union in 1990, when I was there, and when there was always a blue small car, I think it's called a dacha, one of these little cars that was parked across the street from the synagogue in Kiev, and kind of sitting there, and the two people sitting there, not even trying to hide that they're monitoring who goes in and who comes out.
Yeah, when you refer to yourselves as operators, we see why. So before we dive into the details of the operation, let's watch some video footage from the JDC archives. This first clip contextualizes what Amir shared, the vastness of the USSR and what it meant for JDC to go in. And by the way, you can watch the full video at the link in the chat box. We're not getting sound, Ariel?
No, we don't. I don't get sound at least.
Let me unmute and see if that makes a difference.
When you look at the map of the Soviet Union and see the distances involved, you can see that an operation of this kind is almost impossible. But the impossible became possible. The cargo and the Israeli emissaries brought Passover to every corner of the Soviet Union. For 70 years, they forced our Judaism out of us. And if not by force, then by fear.
I think I have room for a matzah map of the Soviet Union somewhere on this wall. It's really cool.
Yeah.
So Amir, why did JDC decide to do this around the Passover holiday? Why Passover?
Passover is a symbolic freedom holiday in Jewish tradition, awakening, spring, combines both biblical stories and tradition on one hand, and over the years, generations of other layers of renewal and opening. And we actually came to it because we started negotiating with the Russians, I would say in the winter of 1989, towards January of 1990, when we first approached them and asked for permission. And the nearest holiday, obviously, that we felt may be available was Passover. We also realized it's one of the holidays that people come, there's a pretext to gather people together. It's not like Rosh Hashanah when you celebrate often in your home. It's not like other holidays that you celebrate at home and among your families. And this was the wonderful pretext to combine all these elements.
Yeah, definitely community is part of it. And even during the Soviet Union, even in my family, I heard stories of like finding matzah in some way. And even if it was regular dinner, just that was a win in some way, just being able to access that. Why, you mentioned that you got permission from the Soviet Union. I imagine there was a lot of skepticism and bureaucracy coming at you from all angles. Can you give us a sense of like, what was the behind the scenes of Operation Passover and your role?
We decided to go up to the top and ask for permission. This was after we have been dancing a little tango with the Kremlin over a year and a half, since 89 and 90. We had few JDC operators, 6 operators who used to go in and out and visit Jewish communities. All was done under the open supervising eyes of the KGB, and they were monitoring, trying to catch us doing something illegal, which we didn't. For this kind of massive, vast operation, we reached out and got to the equivalent of the Minister of Religious Affairs in Russia, as a gentleman by the name of Karchev. And just as I mentioned in the article I wrote at the time, it's funny how they related to religion. The Russian name for this ministry was not Ministry of Religion, it was Ministry of Cults, because anything religious was a cult in the eyes of the Communist Party. Opium for the masses and something that should be detested and discouraged. And in negotiating with this minister, that was already the time that they were looking for favor in the United States and to be seen differently by the public in the West. This is glasnost and perestroika. So to our great surprise, he said something like, well, after consideration, we came to the conclusion that if you try to do that, it will not be considered an anti-government and anti-Soviet operation. And my comment at the time was that this is how a commissar says yes without saying yes. No, he didn't really say yes. That if you do it, we will not be considering it as an anti-Soviet propaganda. So you're not going to go to jail and you're not going to be arrested. And that's how it started. And then we started planning it.
Where were you? Were you on the ground there, or were you in the New York?
No, I was stationed in New York. The headquarters was in New York. The whole center of nerves was in New York. We operated our partners in Israel. It was a government agency. It was at the time part of the intelligence community that was able to send people around. And we had our own operators that were living at the time, believe it or not, in 5 or 6 cities. We have one in Paris and one in Vienna. And somebody else was in Israel and somebody in London. And they were traveling back and forth in the Soviet Union. Each trip needed a separate visa request and approval in all limited days. So for a JDC operator to go, let's say, into Kharkov in Ukraine or into any of the cities, was a whole procedure. Submit, explanations, visa, get a visa that says you have a week to be there. And that's the way we operated.
And this was like recon work they were doing?
It was in many ways, yes, reconnaissance work of trying to see where the Jews. When we started going there, we really didn't know. Nobody knew what is the map of Jews in the Soviet Union, because it's been years and years and years since 1967, since there was an Israeli embassy in Moscow and there was an open contact with the Jews. And the question was, 50 years later, where are the Jews? How many are in Odessa and what kind of life is, and how many are in Moscow and how many in St. Petersburg? And what about the Muslim republics, all these Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan and other places? We knew there were Jews there, but we didn't know, do they have community life? Do they have some kind of gathering or what?
And how did you meet their community needs if it was so opaque?
We did not meet their community needs at the first shot. The first year or so was basically trying to discover what are the needs. And here comes a very ironic situation. JDC's culture and philosophy is that we do not tell communities what to do, and we don't tell them what to ask for and what to do. We say, you tell us what exactly you do in order to enhance your Jewish life. This is our tradition everywhere we go, in Latin America and in Europe and in other places. This was the irony. The Jews of Russia, after 70 and sometimes 50 years of the government eradicating any sign of Jewish life, arresting people for doing anything from teaching Hebrew to celebrating Jewish holidays, there was a barren land. And when you came to, let's say, the community in Kishinev and say to them, folks, what do you need in order to organize Jewish life? The answer was, you tell us what do we need. We don't know. What do we need? I mean, we haven't had a rabbi here in 50 years. We don't know what it is. There's one synagogue that few elderly Jews walk in every Shabbat and celebrate. So we found ourselves in a situation where we need to tell the community what customarily in the West is a Jewish community. And oh, interesting. Oh, really? You have like welfare operation of the community? Yes, we try to help the needy. Oh, and you have a culture operation? Yes. Do you have a Jewish school? Oh, we are not sure we can do that because we are not sure it's allowed to teach Hebrew. It would be, again, against the rule. So it was a give and take. We didn't come to say, tell us what you need and we'll give you the supply, or they will send you the teachers or the rabbis or whatever. It was basically, we told them what customarily, let's say people in London or Paris or Buenos Aires, Jews keep as a community, and we say, what do you think out of that? Can you select what you think you can do?
I just think that's so beautiful, because in the end, like, probably what you settled on was that Russian-speaking Jews there needed a different access point to their own ancestry and heritage and traditions. We had a clue. My name Margarita is, you know, we name after the first letter. Margarita is actually after a cancer in my family from generations ago named Mendel Shlomovich. But I had no connection to that kind of, yeah, I have a relation with Ariel in that way. So that's really amazing that you guys
Let me tell you something else though. Margarita, I mean, one of the first things we did discover we need, and immediately responded to that, we discovered that Russian Jews, Russians generally, not just Jews, read. They love books, they read, they really proud of their literary tradition and the ability to read. And the first thing we did, we had softcover books translated to Russian, Hebrew books, Israeli books, American books. We put together thousands and thousands of these books printed in Russian, and we put libraries, we call them turnkey libraries. It would be a box, a big box that will have like 32 titles or 50 titles and a lot of books, something that can be stored in a private apartment and go under the bed even, and people can come in and borrow books. And this was the first attempt to do something that we knew, and people ask us, books? Who reads books these days? And we said, Russians read books, cherish books, admire books, and live by the books. Do you know what was the most popular book from all the translation?
I can't.
Exodus by Leon Uris was a book that was loved and was sought after everywhere. But there was a lot of Amos Oz and Israeli authors, fiction, and not just fiction, American authors, Chaim Potok and other American authors, Agnon, I'm trying to think, Bashevis, Zinker, etc. These books were the first attempt to push in Jewish knowledge through literary fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, Roman Shmulinson at Kojeko mentioned that at the symposium for RSJ professionals. He said they grew up like understanding their context in the global Jewish community through that book, Exodus. That's amazing. So let's take another look at another clip from the archives to get a picture of what it looked like to have the community gather for the first time. We'll get a sense of how JDC was showing up visually.
1 second. Okay.
Hours before the Seder begins, people gather at the entrances to be sure of a seat. Many new faces are seen. Faces of young people acknowledging their Jewish identity for the first time. On the one hand, I feel like everyone, good that something is materializing, that we can come and celebrate our holiday in peace. On the other hand, this one Seder is not big enough for the number of Jews who have gathered here. Even those who can't find seats at the Seder come to be together, to feel a sense of belonging, to feel the special atmosphere of Jewish awakening as the Israeli emissaries of the JDC conduct the Seder.
I mean, you were expecting 4,000 Jews to show up and 11,000 showed up.
Yeah,
How
that's
was
correct.
that? How did you handle that capacity? And what did you guys bring, by the way, for Operation Passover?
So first of all, it happened in about 20 cities. So not all 11,000 showed up in one place. No, in each city, there was usually more than capacity. What we sent from Israel in a very complicated way via Germany and then Finland and then all over trucking all over the Soviet Union, we sent the elementary for people who never had Seder in their life, gallons and gallons of kosher wine, boxes and boxes of matzahs, of course. We sent tons of paper plates and paper utensils so they can celebrate it. Obviously, nobody had a kosher place of dishes. And we printed a light version of the Haggadah in Russian, in modern Russian, so people can, with explanations of the rituals. I mean, most of these people never in their lives participated in a public Seder. I mean, they may have some tradition quietly in their own home, closing the windows, shutting the curtains, and then taking one matzah and explaining this is a Jewish holiday and we are celebrating without knowing what it is. So we needed to have the elementary, and the people that we sent to guide the Seders were all ready to explain things and not just to go through the Haggadah the way, let's say, experienced people do.
Oh, I love that video. You guys should check out the whole thing. There's a part where an old babushka is taking binoculars to see closer what is being shown to the group. It was really great to see babushki seeing for the first time their own traditions. I wonder, like, thinking about today, what parallels do you see between this operation and how JDC responds to crises today?
Well, shockingly enough, I can see exactly the parallel, and it happened to me as I was thinking about this conversation, anticipating it. We are back in the same situation where we cannot reach our clients. In 1990, part of it was this, oh, we are getting into the Soviet Union and we are trying to reach these people where we couldn't reach until now. Lo and behold, as I sit here and talk to you today, we are again unable to reach all these tens and tens of thousands of Russian Jews and Ukrainian Jews and others, especially the elderly that we, until a month ago, were taking care of. We're unable to reach them, not because of the evil empire, but because of the evil virus. I mean, but it's the same way. We are sitting in New York, trying to help and are unable to reach the people who need our help.
Let alone reach our own families.
Let alone
And
that we are
this holiday,
exactly.
yeah, this holiday, as we said, is so focused on community. And this year, families around the world are about to celebrate Passover in a way they never have before. And I wonder, what lessons can we take from your story to apply to our own Passover experiences this year?
Oh, there are endless lessons that one can take. I mean, the main lesson is, of course, that you have to be prepared for I call it, to think of the unthinkable. And in my part, you said special operations, and my part is dealing with rescue of Jewish communities and sometimes in security and safety of Jewish communities. I often talk to my board members and say there are certain scenarios that we categorize as thinking of the unthinkable. I know it's unthinkable, but let's think about it anyway, because if it appears, we should at least thought about it. So that's lesson number one. What we should not put aside the unthinkable, because the unthinkable, even though the odds are might be low, can show up one day. The other lesson from today's situation is that you see the best of human beings, probably the worst as well, but so far, at least in the United States, it seems to be that people are all rising up to the challenge, and individuals all over are giving a shoulder and helping. And I think that's what JDC has been doing for 106 years, trying to go to places of need and to give a shoulder and to harness and mobilize the local good people to do the best they can do, whatever humanly possible, to help people in need.
Thank you for those wise lessons. Be ready so you don't have to get ready, and rise to the occasion. So before we pivot to questions from our audience, I have a final question for you, Amir. At a time when we are all forced to stay very local, from your perspective, what can we in America do to support global Jewish community?
Local, you mean in America or overseas?
So how can we...
When you say local, what do you mean in this context?
JDC is so focused on the global, how can our audience join in on the fun? How are they able to feel that same connection to the global Jewish community that a lot of our alumni, Entwine alumni, have been traveling to these countries and form these connections, and this necessity of mutual responsibility to each other? How can they practice that today despite our disconnections physically?
I think every Entwine alumni who traveled and served in overseas retained some contacts in the places where they served. Now, some people, they continue to have Facebook or email or other contacts, assuming that they'll go back or went back. And I think the least you can do today, you people that are listening to me, is sit on your computers and contact these contacts and express solidarity and share things. I mean, the human contact when people sit alone at home if you served in Zagreb, or if you served in Berlin, or if you served somewhere else, and you still have some friends from the time that you did an Entwine Jewish Service Corps or a shorter trip, go on, maintain these contacts and reach out to these people, express solidarity. It's the least you can do. Of course, you can contribute funds to the JDC emergency campaign, but I know that not everybody is able to do it. Every penny obviously helps and every dollar helps, so it's not the size of the contribution. But the human contact via electronics at this point, when people sit alone in their home, they may not have that many local friends or family in the place, and you served there. You were there. You were in Odessa. You were in, people who were in Poland, in Warsaw, in Krakow, in other places on behalf of Entwine. Pick up your contacts list and reach these people. Say, how are you doing? I was wondering. I was thinking about you. I mean, it's helpful.
Absolutely, that really resonates. I mean, last week we heard from Kate from Repair the World, and she talked about local organizations here in the US who are connecting homebound elderly with young people on the phone. And the Entwine team right now is working on a project to virtually connect Russian-speaking Jews from the US to homebound elderly in the former Soviet Union. So really exciting. I mean, as you had said, be ready so you don't have to get ready. You're ready with your technology, so now's the time to connect. So with that, I wonder, Ariel, if we've gotten any questions from the audience.
Sure, and everyone feel free to post any questions you might have in the chat or in the Q&A. We have a question here. How do you see the communities in the former Soviet Union changing after the COVID crisis kind of peters out?
I wouldn't pretend that I know. I mean, none of us know what will be the world after the virus, neither in America nor in the Soviet Union. I fear that a significant number of the elderly may suffer or may perish as a result of a lack of help or being attacked by the virus itself. I also do not trust any statistics and any information that's coming out of Russia in terms of how many people are infected and how many people die. I'm sure they're trying to play it down. In the Jewish community, we'll try to gather knowledge and to hear more, but it may have dealt a serious blow to the population of the elderly and Holocaust survivors that we have been helping. I fear that that may change the demographics of the communities.
I feel like the effects of Operation Passover and all the outreach that JDC and partners have done since then have probably set, as we saw with our own eyes, anyone who's gone on an Entwine trip, the revitalized Jewish life entails people our age being the community leaders, and that sense of mutual responsibility is definitely tangible there. And so at the very least, I anticipate that carrying on, just as we see here.
Yeah. I hope that younger generation of people who at this point are unable to go into the home of the elderly and serve them, maybe once it's allowed, will again mobilize to help where others have disappeared.
Amir, any final Passover message you would like to share with the group during this challenging time?
The message is simple. The Entwine group is one of the elite groups that I ever had the honor and the pleasure to be involved in. And you all on this call are people who are selected, people who we at JDC are fortunate to have you taking time of your life and professional life and devote to public service. So you have a responsibility. You are leaders, even if you don't see yourself this way. You are able to motivate others. And at this time, any streak of leadership is significant. And it doesn't matter how young you are or how old you are. And in your own communities, do the best. And within JDC, do the best to mobilize others and to work with them. And the final message is, of course, make sure you stay safe and healthy. Take no risks. There's no point in taking risks right now in vain. and we'll all get together once this is over.
Thank you for that message. I share the same with you. Stay safe and stay healthy. Amir and Margarita, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really wonderful speaking with you and learning about Operation Passover and how we can apply the lessons from that experience to our own Passover today. Thank you to our audience. It's really great seeing you each week. We hope that you will join us for our next exclusive on April 22nd after Passover. We're going to sit down with some experts in the international development space and learn about the impact of COVID-19 on the developing world. So it should be a really interesting session. A couple of plugs for some things coming up with Entwine. Join us later today at 3 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to learn how to make a Passover recipe with one of our Entwine alumna. That will be on Facebook Live. If anyone is interested, you can still order a digital copy of Reordered, which is Entwine's Global Passover Toolkit. And we're going to be posting a video later today on how you can use that toolkit in your home. And you can check out all of these details and more on Entwine's The Thread on our website. And finally, when I close out this call, a survey should pop up on your screen. We want to keep serving our community in the best way we can with your feedback. So please let us know how you're doing. And just thank you again for joining us. Chag Sameach, happy Passover, happy whatever you celebrate in your homes. And please stay healthy, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Bye,
you.
Margarita.